If without any further ado, we'll start off with our first speakers for today. Our first topic being successful establishment of tropical perennial grasses in southern New South Wales. We have Dr. Sue Boschma. Sue is a senior research scientist with New South Wales Department of Primary Industries based at Tamworth. She has over 20 years experience in pasture grass and legume field-based research. Over the last 15 odd years, her research has focused primarily on tropical grasses and legume species and their adaptation to northern inland New South Wales, and more recently to their potential in central and southern New South Wales. Sue's research contributes to providing resilient pasture options to maintain and/or manage feed supply year-round and quantify and overcome issues affecting their productivity and persistence. Following Sue's presentation, Sarah Baker will also present, and Sarah is the Development Officer with New South Wales DPI based in Tamworth. She has been working with both temperate and tropical pastures for the last 5 years. She is currently involved in a research project looking at the potential fit for tropical grasses in central and southern New South Wales and investigating the enablers and constraints to the adoption of these pasture species in those regions. So we'll kick off with you, Sue. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff, and thank you everyone for joining this morning. It's great to have so many people joining us. Look, I'm leading the project, as Jeff was saying. We've been looking at we have a current project where we're looking at the opportunity of tropical pastures in southern New South Wales, central and southern New South Wales. And we had always planned on having a number of workshops with producers and advisors down in southern New South Wales. But with the latest outbreak of COVID, we've had to have a change of plan. But it became pretty clear as we were looking or promoting these workshops that there was actually a lot more interest in tropical pastures and people preparing to trial tropical pastures than what we had initially thought. So since we weren't able to have the workshops, we thought it was probably quite timely to have a webinar, so that we could forward some information to be able to assist people as much as possible. So today, the objective of our webinar is basically to provide information to the producers online and to the agronomists to be able to assist you and your clients to be able to trial tropical pastures. So this webinar is about establishment. It's not about the systems fit, nutritive value, animal production associated with tropical pastures. It's purely about the establishment. Now, one of the things that's really important to remember about establishment of these tropical pastures is that it is prior planning and preparation. Like all perennial pastures, that planning needs to go into place right from the get-go, and you need to treat it like a crop. Now, we acknowledge that as you head further south, establishment is riskier. So again, good planning is key. So just to sort of set the scene and to kick this presentation off, I just wanted to show a little bit of work that we've been doing as part of our current project, which is part of the Livestock Productivity Partnership, where we've looked at some modelling, which was looking at the establishment of tropical pastures in a number of different locations, modelling their establishment for the 30 years, which finished last summer. So these are some data for Cowra. The pasture was sown in September, and we looked at the establishment opportunities over the period each month up until March. And up the left-hand side of this figure, we've got the number of years over that 30-year period where we had successful establishment. So in this particular example, we've got Cowra. 7 years, or 71% of those years, we actually had successful establishment. And we can see that the majority of those, or the first emergence event, actually occurred in December. Now, if we compare this with Condobolin, also in central New South Wales, we've got good emergence occurring in both November and January. with, nearly 80% establishment success. Now, as we head further south, the numbers actually looked pretty ordinary, and we went, oh my goodness. But when you actually look into that a little bit more, we actually changed the soil type for Leeton, changing it from a red chromosome into a brown chromosome, and we were actually able to increase the emergence up to nearly 100%. So I think this goes to show that we need to be mindful about where we put in these pastures, give thought to our planning, our preparation, the soils that we're attempting to establish these pastures into, because it's all going to be really important to be able to minimize the riskiness that you've got with your unpredictable summer rainfall and the fact that it is so highly variable. Now, the other point that we did as part of this little bit of a study was actually look at the potential of cover. So say sowing into a cereal stubble. And what we found is that some years, in some locations, it did actually increase the frequency of years where we had success. But in many cases, what it actually did was meant that we had more success earlier in that growing window. So instead of it being for using Cowra as an example, instead of being in December, it actually meant we had more emergence occurring in November. So it meant that we were able to make better use of that sowing window for establishing a tropical pasture. All right, so let's get started on the steps for successful establishment. So our first one is to control grass weeds for at least 2 years. Now, grass weeds or competition from grass weeds is probably one of the biggest things that actually affects or results in poor establishment of a tropical pasture. Now, this is data which is from northern New South Wales. We haven't done this work in central or southern New South Wales, but I think the principles are going to be pretty much the same. In northern New South Wales, we controlled weeds, summer grass weeds for 2 summers, 1 summer, and then we just did, in our third treatment, we just sprayed in spring and then sowed the pasture. What we found is where we controlled grass weeds for 2 summers, we were actually able to deplete that seed bank of those summer grass weeds down to about 15 seeds per metre squared. Where we only controlled them for 1 summer, we still had a seed bank of around 1,600 seeds. And where we only controlled our grasses for immediately prior to sowing the pasture, we had, over 5,500 seeds per metre squared. Now, when we were actually only placing a couple of hundred seeds of our sown pasture in the ground, if it's got to compete with 1,000 or more seeds, then it's going to be struggling. So it means that in order to be able to control these weeds, it means that every time you get an emergence event over that summer period, those weeds need to be controlled, whether that's through spraying, cultivating, or grazing. Grazing is not always as effective because the moment the plant becomes stressed, it will put up a seed head. But they need to be controlled. Now, in northern New South Wales, we've actually had producers say that they can control weeds, up to 5 times over a summer in order to deplete those summer grass weeds to control them. Now, as you head further south, you're not going to be getting as many summer storms. So it might mean that you will definitely need those 2 years those 2 summers to control weeds. You may actually need a 3rd summer in order to be able to control those weeds. Now, this weed control can actually be incorporated as part of your management program. It doesn't mean that you need to have a paddock sitting in fallow for 3 years. It can be incorporated as part of your program. So you might have a forage ode or a crop over the winter period, and then you would have a summer fallow. But just be mindful if you are going into a cropping paddock, just to consider your residuals so that you're not actually going to be affecting your pasture when you sow it. Now, just as a rule of thumb, if you were to work across your paddock and say pick up handfuls of dirt, if you can start seeing more than a couple of seeds, grass seeds in your hand as you're picking up different handfuls, then you probably you need to hold off for another year and control weeds for a little bit longer. Okay, our second step. It's really important to be able to store soil water before you sow. Now, it's the rainfall event is actually going to result in the germination in your initial emergence, but it's that stored soil water that's actually going to keep your seedling alive. Now, on heavier and medium type soils, we generally work on about 1 metre of stored soil moisture, while on the lighter or the sandier soils, because they don't store as much water and they fill and empty a lot quicker with that lower water holding capacity, then you don't need to get caught up on that 1 metre. But on the heavier soils, it really is worth storing that soil moisture. So what we've found is that soil moisture actually helps with seedling persistence. So the data that is shown on the right-hand side of the screen here is actually from Trangie. Grasses, a range of tropical grasses were sown in spring, summer and autumn under a high and a low water holding stored soil water treatment. And I think there was about 100 millimetres difference between the two. On the grasses that were sown in spring, where we had high stored soil moisture, 14 months after the little pastures were sown, there was a 91% seedling survival rate, while where there was low stored moisture, we only had 60% of those seedlings survive. Now in autumn, the difference between the high and low stored soil moisture wasn't anywhere near as significant, probably because we're heading into that winter period where the soil moisture, you've got a better chance of refilling it with your winter rainfall. But going into autumn actually then gives you some issues, is that you've also potentially got potential frost damage to your seedlings. But based on stored soil moisture, having that stored soil moisture allows your pasture to establish stronger. Your seedlings are going to be more robust and healthy. And that difference in that seedling survival and also the seedling robustness was still evident 18 months after that initial pasture was sown. So stored soil moisture is actually really important. Okay, step 3, you need to choose adapted species, so species which are suited to your environment. Now, there are 3, the initial work which was done on this was based back in the 1990s by DPI, and it actually, the story hasn't really changed all that much, because everything was based not on rainfall, but predominantly on the soil type. Now, there has been some development in a number of different species and new varieties available, but largely these groups still hold very true. So there's a group of species for your light soils, lovegrass, digitgrass. Obviously, console lovegrass can't be sown everywhere down south, so it has the star on it just as for that reason. There's a group of species for your medium soils where you have a pH of say 5 to 7 on those clay loams. And then as you head into heavier soils, into the clays, then there's a range of species there as well. Now, these species, there's a couple of them that can handle flooding. So Bambatsi panic can handle flooding, but it doesn't like waterlogging. The vast majority of them don't like waterlogging. But on the whole, none of them like being wet, waterlogged over winter. So position in the landscape and selection of your soil type is really important. Now, as part of our current project, we actually have a range of sites located across central and southern New South Wales. So six sites, and these majority of these were sown in 2018. So they've been through the drought. The orange one has had multiple falls of snow on it. So these are real data and hopefully going to be of use as the experiments continue and we get to see what really is persistent. So let's start with orange. What I've got here is this. So for a number of these sites, I've actually presented the data in the same way, just so that we can move through them pretty quickly. So across the bottom of each of these figures, we've got plant frequency in autumn this year. Now, plant frequency is a measure of the persistence of each of these grasses. each of these species. Now, up the left-hand side, we've got dry matter production, which was for the 12-month period up to and including autumn this year. Now, the dotted lines on each of the figure are the averages for both of those traits. So everything which is in that top right-hand quadrant are the entries which have both good persistence or above average persistence and production based on all those in the experiment. Now, so in this case, the tropicals have got the blue dot, and the temperates, which we've got in there as a comparison, have the red dots. Now, last summer, spring, summer, in orange was beautiful season, and the temperates have done really, really well. But it's just quite interesting to see that a number of the tropicals have also done well. Premier Digit is both looking good, productive and persistent. Bambatsi Panic is up there. We've also got some Paspalums, and yeah, Kikuyu has actually persisting quite well there also. Now, if we move south to orange, to Cowra, here the grasses were sown in, the tropical grass was sown in spring 2018. The temperates were sown in autumn 2019, but the grasses failed. Lucerne established, but the grasses failed. They were re-sown last autumn. So the data that is presented here for the grasses are in their establishment year. Now, again, not surprising, the temperates are up in that top right-hand quadrant. But again, we've got Premier Digit grass, Gatton Panic is looking really good. We've got Kikuyu, Bambatsi Panic is up there, not doing too bad as well. What's interesting though is that some of the other panics and Rhodes grasses have all failed to persist, both at this site and also at Orange. Now, if we head west from there out to Condobolin, again, the grasses were sown in 2018, sorry, the tropicals in spring 18, and the temperates the following autumn. Here, I've actually been really quite surprised by this because the Rhodes grasses, which aren't really known for their drought persistence, they've actually up there in that top right-hand quadrant. So they're looking good at the moment. It will be interesting to see as the experiment continues whether they actually continue to do well or not. But also up there, again, we've got Bambatsi. Premier Digit is hanging in there as well and got reasonable production along with the Panic. Now, as we head south down to Yanco, where we've got an experiment, here the tropicals established, and we had 2 attempts at establishing the temperate, and it didn't establish. Trying to get a temperate perennial established in a tropical is actually very difficult, and we weren't successful in this particular site. But again, we've actually got the Rhodes grasses doing particularly well here. Catambora and Reclaimer are the 2. Callide has tended to been the first one to fall out at each of the sites. Bambatsi Panic isn't doing particularly well at this site, probably partly because of the soil type. But again, you've got Kikuyu's doing well. We've got Gatton Panic there and also Premier Digit. Now, if we head west from there out to Goolgowi, in this particular experiment, this was more an opportunistic one. We had some other work which was being conducted at there. So we thought we'd just put a tropical grass experiment in there as well. And it's really been quite enlightening. So this experiment, the temperates were actually sown first. They were sown in autumn 2019, and the tropicals were sown in November. I think the day after the tropicals were sown, there was something like 40 millimetres of rainfall. The guys came back a month later and had a look at the experiment, and the temperates were looking fantastic, while the tropicals were actually looking, pretty disappointing. 6 months on, it turns out that there'd actually been a number of rainfall events there'd been multiple emergence opportunities, and the tropicals had emerged. And so from that time on, their frequency has increased to the point where in autumn this year, they had frequencies, of up to 65% for the best of the tropical grasses. Now, in contrast, the temperate grasses have all fallen out. They established well, but they didn't actually they didn't survive the first summer, with the exception of Lucerne. But, with the ground cover available with Lucerne, it's probably not best on its own in that sort of environment anyway. So this is still early days, and it will be interesting to see how it continues going forward. These experiments, hopefully we'll be able to continue these for a few more summers yet and actually see what they can really deliver. Okay, the next step.
Thank you, Suze. So next thing to consider when establishing a tropical pasture is your seed quality. Seeds are big investments, so you want to get the best that you can find. This example on the screen is probably one of the worst that we've seen. You'll notice that there's only 15% germinable seed, and you're potentially bringing in 50% of the seeds going to be weeds that you bring into your property. So tropicals do generally have quite a significantly lower germ than our temperates. A couple of reasons for that. There's not been the breeding and development of tropicals, say compared to something like a fescue. So they haven't been bred so much for the seed production. And also they don't have synchronous flowering. So when the seed gets harvested, there can be both immature and mature seeds in the seed. So we always suggest that you get a seed test or see a seed test before you purchase your tropical seed. This is a snapshot of some of the information that you'll see on a seed test. So some key things to look at are the purity, which is up there on the top left-hand corner. That will show you how much pure seed you have. So that's the seed that you're actually buying. This is an example of digit seed. It'll also show you other seeds, so if you're potentially bringing in any weeds, and it'll show you if there's lots of straw or trash in your seed sample as well. The next thing to consider is your germination, and you want to look, say on this sample, we're looking at the normal, the 10-day germination, which is 47%. So this is the percentage of seeds that are likely to germinate for you. You've also got some abnormal seeds. You probably won't get established plants out of those. Fresh seed is an indication of seed dormancy. So if you've got a high level of fresh seed, which can particularly be seen in your panics, such as Gatton panic and Bambatsi panic, that seed may not germinate straight after it's been sown. So that's just something to consider. With the fresh seed, yeah, it's hard to know if it will germinate and when it will germinate. Something we were seeing a little bit last year, particularly with seed that was sold privately, is it was being sold on a tetrazolium or TZ test. So your TZ test is a quick test, and it will measure the percentage of live embryos, seed embryos. You just need to be aware that that will also include your abnormal and your fresh seed. So with our tropical grasses, a TZ test is not necessarily a good indication of what your actual germination will be. So it's worth taking the time to get a proper germination test before you purchase seed. Make sure you see that. Other things to consider on your seed test is make sure it's not shown in this screenshot, but it's actually the species that you're wanting to purchase, and that it's from an accredited lab. The lab accreditation is called NATA. Next thing to consider is sowing rates, and as I mentioned, the germination percentage can be highly variable with your tropicals, so you want to see what germination you've got before you work out your sowing rates. We'd suggest talking to your seed company where you're getting the seed from, see what their suggested sowing rates are. Make sure if you've got bare seed, you're getting the suggested rate for bare, and if it's coated seed, you're getting the suggested rate for coated. Ideally, we're aiming for 4 to 9 established plants per metre squared. So that's something to consider. Also, another thing to consider is generally with tropicals, your strike rate is pretty low, so you do need quite a few seeds in the ground to get a seed come up. Coated versus bare seed, it's really what's going to suit you best, and just be aware of the benefits and disadvantages of each. Your bare seed, obviously you'll get more seeds per kilo, but your seed can not flow very well through your seeder, and you can get blockages and things like that. If you are going to sow bare seed, we'd suggest mixing it in with some fertilizer to help the flow. Just be careful that you don't get a separation of the seed and the fertilizer. If you're sowing coated seed, it can help with the ballistics. It'll also help with the seed flow through the seeder. Be aware that you will be getting less seeds per kilo. So that's what this photo is demonstrating. We can see on the left-hand side, we've got our bare seed. Then in the middle, we've got seed coated at 200%. So that's 50% seed, 50% seed coat. So we need to double our sowing rate. On the right, we can see we've got seed coated at 500%, and it does look quite a lot larger than the bare seed. But you've only got 20% seed versus 80% seed coat. So if you're buying coated seed, consider how many seeds you've actually got per kilo, and adjust your sowing rates accordingly. The next thing that's key for a successful establishment is ground cover. So cover helps to capture water, and it helps to keep the soil surface a little bit moist. And that can be particularly important in a marginal year on a hard setting soil if you're sowing into a hard setting soil. So an experiment that was done in Tamworth looked at different levels of ground cover and the effect on establishment. So in this experiment, it was a cereal crop that was then sprayed out in September to leave some standing stubble, and then the tropical was sown into that pasture in December. So in the first treatment, there was no ground cover, and as you can see, pretty poor seedling survival. The next treatment, again, no ground cover, but the seed was sown into furrows, which did improve establishment. But success with furrows will depend on your soil type, and it'll also depend on whether you get summer storms sort of washing those furrows and burying the seed a bit deeper. The next treatment was the stubble was ungrazed, or I should say the cereal crop was ungrazed. So there was quite a bit of cover, almost 4 tonnes. And we got a pretty good plant establishment, sort of 5 to 7 plants, which is in what we'd consider a good plant population. However, in the treatment where we had a little bit less cover, they got much better plant establishment. So with this treatment, the cereal crop was actually grazed before it was sprayed out. So you got the benefit of getting a graze as well as getting a good establishment with your tropicals. Next thing to think about is sowing depth. So the ideal sowing depth is between 10 to 25 mils. But we'd say aim for that 10 mils, because that allows, if you get a bit of area of seed going a bit deeper or a bit shallower, you should have the majority at that 10 mils, which is the ideal optimum sowing depth. Something to consider if you've got a tying machine, if you've got a furrow and you're sowing the seed and you're aiming for about 1 centimetre, and then you get collapsing of the edges, or whether that's just the soil type or whether that's a rainfall event, then suddenly your seed might be buried at 3 centimetres, and that could lead to quite poor emergence. So if you've got furrows, we suggest trying to get the seed at the edge or the side of the furrow, or on the at the base of the furrow sitting on the surface, and then just go along with press reels so you get good seed soil contact. So next thing to consider is time of sowing. So this is some preliminary data. It's still being analysed, but we thought we'd put it up to give you a bit of an idea of what we're seeing. So we're looking at 4 sites, Orange, Cowra, Condo and Wagga. And we're looking at the soil temperature average over 14 days and the effect that has on emergence. And we're looking at 4 different grass types. So the dark line is our rhodes grass. Then we've also got Bambatsi panic, Gatton panic and Premier digit in the green. And what we saw in this experiment is as soil temperatures started to warm, once they hit about that 19 to 22 degrees, we got some emergence. It was higher for the rhodes grass than for the other grasses, but once we hit above the 22 degrees, we got a significant increase in emergence rates. Then as the season started to cool, so as we're getting into autumn, we saw a drop in emergence rates at about that 16 degrees. However, the rhodes grass sort of held on a bit longer and didn't start dropping until more like the 12 degrees soil temperature. And remembering this is the 14-day average soil temperature. So what does this actually mean in terms of time of sowing? We'd sort of suggest, based on this, you'd be looking at sowing for emergence at orange, say that late November into December. Cowra and Trangie a little bit earlier, and again a little bit earlier in Wagga. We want to be sowing, we'd suggest sowing earlier in the window prior to a rainfall event, so you can dry sow, because that will maximise the number of opportunities you have for subsequent rainfall events in the spring and summer, so you can have the number of emergence events with your tropicals. If you sow, say, in March, then you're running the risk of your plants not being well established before winter and frost hit, and then you could potentially get seedling loss if you've got small plants and frosts. So that's just something to consider. Once you've got your pasture up, there are some post-emergent herbicide options. A couple of things to note is these are only broadleaf options. You can't take a grass weed out of your tropical grass pasture with a herbicide. So prior to sowing, weed control is really critical, that you're on top of those weeds. Also, just think about if you're using some of these broadleaf controls, if you've got legumes and the problems that could cause. Just remember that. As has been mentioned a couple of times, with your tropicals, you'll get a number of emergence events during your establishment period. And that's what this photo demonstrates. You can see there's some, this is digit grass, there's some quite large plants, and then there's some much smaller plants. It's important that you've got a clean paddock so that there are spaces for your plants to come up over subsequent rainfall events if you're still getting germination. If you've got too many weeds, they could potentially smother out some of your seedlings. Oops, sorry. With your pasture, you can get patchy germination. Don't write it off too early. Wait for a few more rainfall events, see if you get more seed up. Remember that we're aiming for that 4 to 9 plants per metre squared for a good pasture stand. If for whatever reason you don't get great establishment in the first year, you can let your tropicals go to seed. And if you've got a good clean paddock, you can get seedling recruitment and your pasture will thicken up. However, we really are aiming for good establishment in the first year. So you've got a good plant population and you'll have a productive pasture that can be utilised sooner rather than waiting for your pasture to thicken up and the production losses that you get with that. So yeah, treat your pasture like a crop. Prior planning and preparation is key. At the end of the day, we really don't want to be these guys that are standing on that bridge. Just acknowledging that this work has been conducted over many years by many different people and through a number of different research projects. Our contact details are on the screen, and also I'll pop a link in the chat to this Green Tropical book. It's got some great information and a bit of a summary or a bit more detail on what we've been talking about today. It does have a Northern New South Wales focus, but the principles for establishment are the same for Central and Southern New South Wales. If you've got any questions for Susan and I, pop them in the chat. We're about to go to a Q&A session. Also just put where you're from, so we've got a bit of an idea when we're answering questions. I'll hand back over to you, Jeff. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Sue and Sarah. That was very comprehensive and some great information in there. We've had a couple of great questions come through. So we'll just see if I can dig my way through those. So one of the first questions there was, are all tropical grasses a C4 grass species?
Oh, hang on. Yep, I'll take that one, Jeff. Hang on, I'm just working out how to turn my video on. Yep, there we go. Yes. So when we are talking about tropical grasses, we're talking about the C4 grass species rather than your temperates, which are considered your C3 grass species.
Yep, great. There was a question up the top too from Rod from Toowoomba, what varieties were used in the trial, and Sue has kindly pasted that into the chat. So if you would like to run through those, they're in the chat there. So where do we go? Is there a comparison for the TZ test versus a germination test? Example, 50% germ will mean a 60% TZ test result.
Look, I don't think you could be that definite because it's going to depend a bit on your species. If it's a species that might have higher fresh seed, then your TZ could potentially be quite a fair bit higher than your germination test. So there's really probably no rule of thumb. So at the end of the day, if you can look at a germ test, that's what I'd be doing.
Okay, thanks, Sarah. From Claire, is there any work being done on newer varieties of kikuyu?
I'm not aware of any work in DPI. There might be some private work. I'm not sure if you're aware of anything, Suze.
Look, Sydney University have a, I don't know whether I'm on or off. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Look, I believe that Sydney University has a breeding program. They've been doing some work on a number of different, developing different varieties. There is a second variety which was produced by privately in the Tamworth area. We've been looking at it here at Tamworth. Look, it's persistent, probably similar productivity to Whittet. But yeah, to the best of my knowledge, Sydney Uni is the main source of breeding material at this point.
Great, thanks, Suze. And the guys from PGG, Wrightson and Barrenberg may have a little comment on that later on. Question from Holbrook Landcare. Will most of these species recruit in following years if left to go to seed? With careful management, can we increase plants per metre squared over time? And I think you did touch on this, Sarah, but you might just give us another session.
Yeah, so our tropicals, with pretty much all the species, we do see a thickening up with the stand, as you mentioned, with good weed control over time. So yeah, it can be different to our temperates where you might not see that so much. Yep,
great. A question from Charlene at Niliquin. They're on irrigation. So the world's their oyster, I would say. Can we pre-water and then sow at Niliquin?
Suze, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, sure. You look, pre-watering is a good idea, especially if you've got the opportunity. That means that you can actually then apply enough water to be able to get that stored soil moisture. Although if you've got irrigation, then you can add it after. I guess the advantage of having the water there prior to sowing is that you've actually got something for the roots to go searching for and growing into. While if you're applying it later, then it's sort of just waiting for that waterfront to get lower with the as the roots are growing. So yes, you can pre-water. Now, the part of the reason we talk about dry sowing is because the soil surface dries so quickly, and in order to be able to get your equipment on, the soil surface needs to be dry enough to be able to get the seed in the ground. And by then, because it's so shallow, you're sowing so shallow that the soil surface is dried. So yes, you can pre-water to get your stored soil water, but you would still be worthwhile putting on a subsequent water after you've sown to bring it up. Hope that answers your question.
Yep. Great, Suze. A question from David. What about winter cleaning with gramoxone, mainly for winter grasses? Would that be fine?
Yeah, look, we do a winter clean with spray seed at different, sorry, I shouldn't be using specific chemical names. My apologies. So yes, we do a winter clean. We tend to go in July when we know that the pasture is dead. And we're actually starting some work at the moment where we're looking at applying a group A over the pasture at different times of the year to actually see whether it's an option as well. So then if you've got a mixed pasture, you can take, say, the ryegrass out of your pasture and say without affecting your legume or any herb or anything that you might have sown in the pasture as well.
Yeah, Suze, I might just ask a secondary question to that one. Has there been much work around the use of your normal winter pre-emergent chemistry and how it may affect the sowing of tropical pastures later in the season or in subsequent seasons?
Can you give me an example?
So things like Sakura, and I shouldn't use the label name, but yes.
So look, Sakura is actually one we've tried with Desmanthus, and it will actually affect the emergence of the legume. You want to be very careful with some of those. Again, it really comes down to prior planning and preparation. Get your weeds under control right from prior to establishing your pasture, so that because look, the more chemistry you put over the top of them, the more you've got a better chance of actually weakening them.
Yep, great. Another question from Holbrook Landcare. Are there any species likely to cope with lower pH soils?
What do you mean by lower pH? So on one of those slides, there was a list of species which would fit in that can go down to, well, I'm not sure. I think we've had things down around 4.5 pH of 4.5. So yes, there are a range of species. Aluminium, I know, can actually stop some species, but digit grass, I think, can grow down. It can handle aluminium of around 40%, something similar. So look, there are a range of species. Now, I think at the end of our presentation, probably during the break, there's the book that was on the last slide of our presentation, showed a green book. That book we've now made available electronically, and the link for that will actually be put in the chat so that people can get access to that book. It has a table similar to what was in our presentation, and we'll actually give a bit more detail about each of those species and the soil pH where they're suited.
Great answer. And just to clarify that, I would think we would be talking low 4s and high aluminiums would be where that question was probably going to. So I think you answered that. Thanks. A question from Charlotte. Do tropical grasses have a level of dormancy, and how long can the seed survive in the soil for future germinations?
Yeah, so particularly your panics do have dormancy, so your Gatton and your Bambatsi. Your digit tends not to have much dormancy, so yeah, it does vary with species. In terms of surviving in the soil, I think that might depend on a few things. It might depend on your conditions and whether the seed, it's wet, if the seed rots, yeah, things like that, whether you get insect theft. Suze, do you have anything else on that?
Yeah, look, I agree with everything you've said, Sarah. In addition to that, we have actually done some overwintering, looking at let's say seed. Well, you actually get recruitment in spring after it's after plants have flowered and set seed in spring. So if you've got a naked caryopsis, they don't tend to overwinter as well than if they're actually enclosed within the bracts. Our recommendation is that you don't sow in autumn aiming for it to come up the following spring, because you actually do get quite a bit of microbial activity, especially if you've got if it's during a drought and you have a dry winter, then a lot of your seed will actually carry through. But if you've got any moisture and you've got microbial activity happening over that winter period, then that's actually going to be detrimental to your seed. Now, in addition to the species that Sarah was talking about with seed dormancy, the other one, so you've got the Gat and Panics, that type, those sort of species, that species. The other one is purple pigeon grass, but it's probably not really one that a lot of you would be looking at further south because it likes the heavier soils.
Great. Another question from the Holbrook Land Care Group. What would you recommend for companion species to enable winter production?
Good question. We're actually starting some work on this now. Look, at the end of the day, you want to be sowing species that are adapted to your environment. So if you're in an area where Ceradella is the species, or Bicerula or subclover, then choose an adapted legume to be able to grow with your tropical grass. Having that temperate annual legume in the mix is a good move. It's a way to be able to get more productivity from your pasture. You get the nitrogen fixation as well, which is great for your grass. We've seen that very clearly here in northern New South Wales. One of the things to be very mindful of, though, is if you end up with, say, a wet winter where you get phenomenal legume growth, similar to what you've had now and even last winter, where you just get that huge bulk, then you'll find that that can actually be detrimental to your persistence of your tropical grass because it smothers the grass. So having a longer season legume in that type of year can be detrimental to your grass. And we've actually had significant losses of both digit grass and Rhodes grass at Cowra and Orange due to significant legume growth. And we've also had it happen up here in northern New South Wales. But by heavy grazing to cut some of that bulk back, we've also had, seen hay being made from it as well to remove some of that bulk. That's also been really good for allowing the pasture to be opened up, and the tropical has come away really well.
Thanks, Suze. Question from Andrew. Where would I find information on current 14-day average soil temp to aid in sowing timing decisions?
Do you want me to answer that one, Sarah?
Oh, yeah, sorry. Yeah, go for it. That's your research.
So, yeah, look, unfortunately, not unfortunately, we thought it was really important to be able to show you some of the information that we're gathering for central and southern New South Wales. So that's why we presented the data we did. But as Sarah said, it is preliminary. So it's a bit, it's not pretty at the moment. What our plan is to do is to, as we work through the analysis of these data, is actually to be able to develop something similar to sorghum, where at 9 a.m. in the morning, if you've got X degrees soil temperature for 3 days, then you're good to go. That's what we're aiming to get. At the moment, we don't quite have that. So what we did, you could probably, if you were looking for something like 19 to 22 degrees, the way you could do it just off the cuff for now could be go to the BOM website have a look at the site data, the daily data for your area. I think you can give an average temperature, an average daily temperature, and just average it over 14-day period. Maybe that's probably the best way to do it at the moment. But mind you, please, it was preliminary data. We just wanted to show you what we're doing. And it was more the shape of those curves. It's, I guess, because as in southern New South Wales, as your temperatures are increasing, the likelihood of getting good rainfall is decreasing. So I guess there's an urge to want to sow earlier, but sowing too early before the temperatures, soil temperatures up, just means that tropical pasture is just going to limp along, and it can be detrimental to your pasture, while just waiting, you know, even 2 or 3 weeks can be enough for your soil temperatures to be high enough, and those seedlings will just rocket, and they will establish a lot better for you, faster for you. So I hope that helps. Sorry, very long-winded.
Good answer, Suze. Thanks. Another question is, compared to other summer active pastures, i.e. lucerne, what nutrient value do the tropicals have, and do certain species have better feed values than others?
Yeah, I was expecting a question along these lines. Look, tropicals are not, they're certainly not lucerne. They're nowhere near as good as lucerne, okay? But, you know, lucerne is a legume. But they can be, with good management, with fertility, they are still, they're effective for animal production. So we've got producers which are getting, you know, well over a kilo per hectare per day on well-managed tropical pastures. And so what nutrient value do they have, and do certain species have better feed value than others? Look, there is a little bit of difference between different species, but the main difference is actually in their growth stage. So when they're short, green and vegetative, just the same as it is with your temperate grass, then that's when your quality will be highest. It's only when you it's only when they're allowed to start elongating, going to flowering. So when they've got this incredible amount of bulk on them, everyone gets particularly excited about them then, but that's when animal production will be low, because the quality's actually gone out of the pasture completely. Jeff.
Yep, great, Suze. Just a comment on the soil temperature from Liz. There is a soil temperature network across Australia that CSD runs, so that might be worth looking for. I do believe a number of the bomb sites may have some soil temperature data. The other one is, we could also go back to a soil thermometer and do your own recordings in the paddock, which quite a few corn growers, maize growers have done in the past. So next question is from Braxton. From the Hunter Valley. Has there been any trial work conducted for tropical varieties suited to the Hunter Valley and areas with a more coastal influence?
The work we've been doing has probably been a bit more west. So as part of these, the current projects that we've been referring to today, there has been some work done by DPI, there has been some work done over there. I can certainly put you into contact with some people, or if you contact me later, I will source some of that information for you. That would be fine.
Great. Some great questions coming through from Charlotte at Goulburn. How much summer rainfall is required to get a tropical grass like Digit established? Does this change if bare or coated?
How much summer rainfall? Yeah, good question. The answer is I don't know. The fact that we were able to get a tropical pasture established at Goolgowi, which has, Jeff, you're probably better idea of this. I think it's, what, 400 millimetre annual rainfall?
Yeah, or less, 350, 375.
Yeah, okay, so it's pretty low, and most of it is probably going to be over that winter period, not over summer, yet we were successful in getting an establishment, getting a pasture there. So I think, yeah, so I don't think there is a magic number. We will certainly be doing more work to get a better understanding of that. But yeah, there is no actual magic number to be able to do that. Now, difference between bare and coated, no. The only difference between the bare and coated seed is basically, or the main difference is the ballistics. So the way it feeds through a seeder. Our experience is that there is no difference. I know some of the seed companies put different things in their seed coat, which may assist establishment, and I'm sure Jake and Ben can fill you in on some of those details when they do their presentations next. But the main advantage we've found between bare and coated is the ballistics. Now, if you do have bare seed, one of the ways to help it actually move through the seeder and stop it binding is actually to mix the fertilizer with it. So, you know, they are issues that can be overdone, and a lot of pastures have been sown with bare seed in northern New South Wales.
Yep. Great, Suze. That concludes our first Q&A session right on time, so we're on track.